All right, guys, we are live, and I am here today with JCM Berne. He is the author of Wistful Ascending, and I would like to welcome you guys to the Beard of Darkness book review channel. And how are you doing?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm
Thank you for
feeling
having
absolutely. Thank you for coming. I feel honored.
me. My pleasure.
Ab- Absolutely. So, after reading your book, I have to say that I never gave sci-fi, and I had to look up what a space opera was. I had to. I had no idea. I almost misspelled it a few times and put soap opera, and they have nothing to do
Very
with each
different.
other. Thank God. And I dove into your novel, and it was a little later than I thought that I would get to it, but because my time management skills are being sharpened at the moment.
Fun.
But when I did, I was not disappointed. It was
Good.
fun. It was a breath of fresh air, and I am so glad that I reached out to you and that I have this book in my possession.
Thank you. It's funny. I think some people might argue with me about calling it a space opera because typically space opera is like an adventure, like they go places. And
Hmm.
really, in Wistful Ascending, no one really goes very far. Like everything takes place in this one, system. No one you're not going from like planet to planet, hopping around. So in that sense, it's not really a space opera, but it fits the tone, more of an action adventure story, and not. It's not like an in-depth examination of like the effect of technology on everyday life in the future, right? Like that's not what this book is about.
Sure.
So in that way, it really is a space opera. So I don't
So,
know. I call it that.
well, I think that after doing my research, because I always kind of go and do my research behind any book that I read, and especially the subgenre that I'm getting into, because still after 2.5 years, I'm still pretty new to the subgenres and what they consist of.
Right.
And I really enjoyed the fact that the Wistful was like a home. I felt really homey. I
Yeah.
used in the past the inn and tavern like the Wheel of Time.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
always makes me feel warm and cozy. And at first, the Wistful wasn't that because I didn't know what to how to view it or how to really take it. But as I read your book, it's like, oh, they're at the Wistful, they're okay, they're shopping or they're eating together
Yeah.
or they're meeting new alien races. It was just really fun.
Well, I mean, the whole like setup for the story is, Rohan is like this retired soldier. He's done things that that haunt him a little bit. Not to huge extent, but and so like where are you gonna go, right? And like so if he was in some place that wasn't sort of comforting or homey, it wouldn't really like he had the whole galaxy at his fingertips. He went, I'm thinking of it backwards, right? He tried to find a place that was going to be like comforting and like where he could try to live like a relaxed life. So
Right.
a great big space station that's out in the middle of nowhere with nothing, and of course, if nothing had happened, if he had just lived a quiet life, there wouldn't be a book, right?
Right.
Of course,
Exactly.
he can't. It's not going to work, right? He can't.
Hmm.
He can't find his quiet life and then just live it. I mean, I'm not writing Legends and Lattes where all he does is like tow ships and like drink
Yeah.
coffee and like meet people. That might be an interesting book in itself, but that's not what I wanted to write. So he's
Yeah.
he's trying to go someplace kind of comforting, and I want to be. It's also like the stakes. You know, I there are books where like people die and the characters are in mortal danger all the time, and I'm like, I wanted something a little more casual, like a little softer, a little easier, right? You should not be super tense every second in this book. Is he about to die? Is everyone gonna get destroyed? Like that's not what's happening. It's a lot more laid back.
I
And
enjoyed that so much. I really did. I enjoyed it because I
yeah,
was like following that story, and you start to empathize with the main character, Rohan, as he talks about his little living quarters that he's in, and he just wants to kind of sleep and just
yeah,
do his day-to-day job, and he always gets pulled in these different directions, and it makes it fun. Like when you say it's a little less adventurous, I would say that because he does go on adventures, and when he does, it's meaningful, it's
mhm.
captivating, and it's often humorous, and the one-liners are great.
Thank you.
um,
Yeah, I have to write like a lot of jokes because otherwise I get bored. If I've tried to write books that are like serious and I can't stick to them, like I don't
mm,
know discipline. Like if I'm not like putting the quips in there, then I get bored of what I'm doing and I can't write. Like I've tried. But
Individualism is something special.
oh,
The human psyche and how we're all different. Each
people,
person.
and it really doesn't work for everyone, right? There are people for whom the humor doesn't work. And I always tell, like, if you've read Wistful Setting and you think the jokes aren't funny, you should probably stop, because I'm not going
Sure.
to stop telling them, right? And if they don't work for you, that's fine. We can be friends, right? I'm not mad, but they're not going away. Like I sent my recent book to a beta reader, and one of them's like, "There's too much like sarcastic humor in this. Like if you took
Too
that out,
much.
the tone would come through better." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not going to happen." Like, thank you for the
Yeah.
suggestion, but that is never right.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're looking for the guy did me a favor. He beta read for me and told me his honest opinion, which is good. That's what I
Mm.
wanted to hear. But he just basically was telling me he's not my reader.
Okay.
Like,
And oftentimes from what I hear, that's very, sometimes that might not be, I don't know as an author, but that's constructive criticism at its, I guess, hardest to take, but maybe at its most revealing, because now you can tell him, I'm probably not going to switch up my style.
right.
Maybe you're not the right reader, and then on the other hand, when somebody absolutely enjoys it like I did, maybe you should continue reading it, because I am who I am, and I'm going to keep writing the way that I write.
I mean, that's the trick, right? You have readers who are your readers who are telling you, like, this scene didn't work. Maybe you should fix it. You have to figure out, maybe I should fix it. Then you have someone telling you, take the humor out, it'll be a better story. And you're like, oh, I'm going to ignore that one, right? Like, I'm not. And as a writer, you've got to sort of feel, because people are going to give you all sorts of feedback, and you have to figure out, some of it I'm going to ignore. I'm going to say, nope, that's not the story I want to tell. A lot of people wanted me to sort of dump all the information about like the world and stuff early in like the first couple chapters, like a
Mm,
big dump. It's like this, just explain it all. And I'm like,
yeah.
no, I'm not doing that, right? I want to. You kind of get eased in. You get little trickles of information, and ideally, you're still finding things out in book 4. There's details, and instead of just dumping them all in the beginning, I'm like, no, I'm gonna. I appreciate you may have wanted that, but that's not happening. I'm
So
not
one
making.
thing that I said, I was telling my wife, like at first, it's really hard to imagine the Wistful
Yeah.
being as big as it is, and at first you're a little overwhelmed. But as you continue to read, it becomes something that you can imagine slowly. And
Yeah.
honestly, you did it great. You did a brilliant job at slowly weaning people into it. At least me as a reader,
Yeah.
and it coming up with this vision that is absolutely enthralling. Like it sounds amazing to live on the Wistful. It really
Yeah,
does.
yeah. A couple million people, right? Kilometers long, right?
Yeah.
Coated in diamond, and I took a lot of inspiration from like TV shows like Babylon 5 and like Deep Space Nine had big space stations. This is before your time, but
That's okay.
I'm older than you, so I watched these when these came out, and you put in a bunch of different restaurants on a place, and like you can give this sense of you don't have to map it out. Like I don't have a piece of graph paper somewhere where like, and this restaurant is here and this one's here.
Mhm.
Like you don't need that. You just have to say, oh, they go to a place,
I
and you
think
get
if you
this
make
sense
it more
of
specific, it's going to be harder to imagine. Like if you're like, okay, so you have to map this out specifically in your brain rather than letting the reader come up with their own version of it. Perspective is so key in many of these fantasy or sci-fi novels that we're reading. It really leaving it up to the reader to come up with their own version of it, I think, is a benefit 100%. And that's what you did by slowly incorporating all the different areas of the Wistful.
yeah,
And Bards and Books says, I had fun binge reading the first 3 books. By the way, the covers keep getting better and better.
yeah. Usman, check your Discord. Book 4 is in your inbox.
All right,
I did
man.
the arcs today. I'm actually in a very strange, like, psychological place because all week I've been doing like the final read through and final edits and like capturing the last few missing commas or whatever. And today I like hit the button, and I published the EPUBs and I sent them to reviewers.
I
Uh,
seen your post today, and I said
yeah,
I made a note to make comment of that because I saw the person's
yeah,
e-reader with your arc on there, and that has to be really cool. And I'm sure it's equally as stressful, but essentially you've got something you've created, you've got your baby out in the world, and people are reading the words that you took the time and your passion to write. And gosh, me as somebody who wants to write a book, and I've started one, I know it's going to take a while, and how much work you guys put into it as indie authors, and just the respect I have, um, and the realization of what it really takes has been refreshing. I know that I look at all these indie authors, and there's so many of them, and every single one of them are so passionate and they work so hard. And I think once you take that step to say, okay, this is the version I want people to read, and it's pretty close to what I'm going to drop on its publication date. I really respect that. So
I'll give you some advice as if you want to write books. Couple things you read that are universal, right? First of all, your first draft is not going to be good. No one's first draft is good. That doesn't mean your final book won't be good, but your first draft won't be. So just accept that. Write it,
sure,
and really, you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be stuff in there that's crap. It's going to happen. Every single person. Second is like writing is a team job. Like you look at my book. There's really my name on it. Maybe you'll see the cover, right? You read the acknowledgments though, and you realize there's a whole lot of people that I talk about in the acknowledgments. But you don't have to read it. But I'm just saying, if you did, right? There's a whole lot of people I mentioned, like the editors, and like, hey, it's other Matt, I think, right? Matt Pittman. Yeah.
yeah, he does go read books.
Yeah. Yep.
You JCM Berne by me reading your Wistful Ascending, and his influence has got me into sci-fi. So he's
Okay.
really into like Red Rising, and that's actually I just got that, and it's one of the first
Not read it.
traditionally. Yeah, it's one of the first traditionally published books I bought in a while. But yeah, he
No.
loves sci-fi, so I know he wants to jump into that world you've got, and I highly recommend it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of good sci-fi out there. There's a lot of yeah. But yeah, so team effort. So you're going to need beta readers. You're going to need other writers to help you, and that's totally that's true for everyone. So those are my two pieces of advice. When you're ready to write and take it seriously, hit us up for because you have a whole community
Yeah,
now, right? That maybe you didn't have a year ago or 2 years
hundred
ago.
percent.
And that's a tremendous resource, and it's free. We're free, right? You can hit us up on Discord and say, why isn't this paragraph working? Like that's not, no one's going to charge you for that.
That's valuable. It's so and that's really I try to explain to my wife kind of what I'm doing when I open the channel. And I know you asked me before we come on, but I kind of forgot this point. When because I'm very passionate about literature, whether it's fantasy or classic, uh, you know, traditional fiction, whatever it is. But if you have gained a following, if you've got people on your side who are willing to critique you, I mean, that can only benefit you in the end. Um, am I right?
100%. I mean, writing my fourth book was this is fifth. Shadow of Hyperion. My fourth book hasn't come out yet, but Shadow of Hyperion is the fifth book I really wrote in like the last 5 years.
Okay.
And it was very different than when I wrote Wistful Ascending, right? I had a whole bunch of people where I could go on Twitter and be like, who wants to beta read this? And I had a whole bunch of people who were like, yeah, you beta read for us. We're your friends. We've read the first few books and liked them, whatever. People were volunteering. I didn't have that community, that support group. And you can ask your friends in real life, and that's great. And I appreciate real life friends who have done it, but it's not always the same level of feedback you get from a writer or a person who's really into like the genre. Like I have friends who have read my books who have like don't really read sci-fi or fantasy, and like they give me
Hmm.
really, I'm grateful to them, but like their feedback wasn't as targeted as people who are writing in the genre, right? There,
Sure.
it's a different level of understanding for the most part. So it's been really nice, and uh, 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 have everything in place there. And as you learn what you're doing, it also helps. Like I'm not stressed about how to get it onto Amazon. I've done it, I've done it four
Hmm.
times. All that stuff.
Sure.
I know the system already, so I have a plan. So it's been a journey. It's been a really really rewarding one. You
That's
follow.
awesome, man. I really envy that, and I hope to one day be right where you are. Being
Yeah,
asked to do interviews.
I'll have you
So
on
when
my
you,
channel interviewing you about your debut. Yeah,
man, I'm looking forward to it. I promise. That sounds amazing. So
right.
when you're not writing, what do you do? What are your hobbies? What are you into?
Um, I've done a lot of martial arts. I've done a lot less since COVID started, and then like
Mm.
I'm not in the right like geographic location. I have a lot of excuses, but I don't work out nearly as much as I should. I used to. I have done a lot in my life. So what do I do now? I don't do, honestly, not a lot. I feel bad. Like I have a day job, I'm a software developer. It takes some time.
I didn't
Um,
know that.
oh yeah, I'm a software developer. So I work from home, which really helps because, if
Okay.
I do my job and I had to commute into Manhattan every day to do it, that would be an extra 3 hours a day, right, on the trains.
Mm.
So instead I work mostly from home. So I don't have, that gives me a lot of time to do stuff. And then I travel a lot because I'm in my second marriage, and my kids from my first marriage are in a different state. So I
Okay,
go
that's got
down
to be hard.
now. Yeah, it is. Well, yeah, yeah, yes. But I go down to see my kids.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't have kids so my kids from my first marriage. I go down to see them quite a bit. That's like a lot of driving and then unpacking, and all that.
Sure. Yeah.
That takes a lot of time and energy out. Um, and then what else do I do? I do some light hiking, like really light, like like
You
the
would
kind of
like where I live then.
where you're out and back in like an hour and a half, not like packing a tent, and I don't do that. I'm
Doing
not.
the primitive thing, right? Where you have to like start your own fires and
That's not me. It sounds great, but it's not me. I
it's
want to
not
stay in the hotel with the jacuzzi and then just
right.
go for an easy walk in the morning or something.
I
So
think that I can relate to that 100% because
yeah.
I've watched Naked and Afraid a few times, and boy, it's starting a fire. Really, even if they're like so confident about it, like, oh, I bet when I get out there, I'm gonna start this fire better than anybody.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, man. Primitive camping and all that. That's a challenge. It's really
It's a whole
something that you
skill.
strive to do.
It's a whole skill set you have to learn. I have tremendous respect for people who go on overnight hikes or people who hunt. That takes a lot of like knowledge that I don't have, and I'm not
Sure.
interested in acquiring it. But I'm like, that's not what I want to do with my life. I'm just let me go sleep in a comfortable bed, and then
Yeah.
when I want to see the nature, let me go where I can park and then walk half an hour, and I'm in nature, and that's all I want.
Absolutely.
And then I
So,
post pictures to Instagram, and that's my hobby, I guess.
all right. Well, that's absolutely awesome. That's acceptable. That's great, man.
And of course
So
I read and I read manga and I read I watch anime and I read science fiction and fantasy. All the that I've been doing my whole life. I've been into
manga is something that I'm just getting my interest in. Just like before I read your book, like sci-fi. So I guess my biggest if you hear a baby in the background, I got kids, man. Sorry.
yeah,
But uh
oh,
so Berserk is one that I'm in the really dark stories and look at that, man. That's awesome.
I'm in a
Every
I'm in a with Steve from he had a YouTube channel Steve Talks Books. I
uh-huh.
don't know him. It's not all up anymore, but he was, and we do a podcast where we read a volume of Berserk pretty much every week, and we talk about it with like a little group. This is not the volume we're on, but these are I was in Berserk when I was reading this stuff 20 years ago.
Oh
Um,
wow, I didn't know. See, me being again kind of new to this, I didn't know it's been around that long. And all I heard was it's really dark. I love dark stories. I'm just naturally drawn to them. So that's kind of like my newest interest. I would say.
Berserk is really dark and really good. Um, and but you have to give it a few volumes. The first two or three volumes are okay, like the ones this size. The first three are fine. You'll enjoy it, but then it really gets going after that. But I really like Berserk. I read it when it came out, but I was around when manga and anime were first coming to the U.S.
Mm.
People were like buying laser discs from Japan and like recording them onto VHS tapes, and then recording them onto other VHS and selling them, and we were watching them in our dorms and stuff. It was a different era. You have it easy now, man. You can just stream stuff, and it has subtitles or dubs. We didn't
Yeah,
have.
I remember that. I do. I remember. And it's funny because I think in getting ready to maybe graduate high school or a little before. And a couple of my buddies that I played football with were really into it. And the first thing that I learned about it just from seeing them read it, I was like, dude, it's backwards. What's going on here? I said, how are you reading that book backwards? I just couldn't understand it. And
Yeah,
it's funny because, now that it's been around for a while, we've seen that's kind of a normal thing now. And it's really cool. It's different.
yeah. You get used to it. If I pick up I don't even think twice about it anymore. After 30 years worth of reading manga, like reading it from the back is becomes second nature. But there's a lot of good stories. In Japan, in this country for a long time, comics were for kids, and cartoons were even more so for kids. And
Mm.
Japan just never really had that. They've been writing, they've had comics and cartoons for grown-ups all along. So
Wow.
so this and there are manga for everybody. Like there's a lot of manga that are for girls, like
Okay.
about like what you would think of as stereotypical girl topics, like about people who are getting into the fashion industry, right?
Okay.
Because anyone will, they don't have the, it's less so now, but like when I was a kid, like girls wouldn't read comics, right? Comics were for boys and they were for only for young boys, and like they were about superheroes and that was it. And Japan never had that like bias, right? So they have comics that were aimed at grown-ups and aimed at females, and they just
I think
so
something so cool is learning about other cultures and how you can't just there's no source social norm that is like equal about every country. So learning
yeah.
another country's social norm, I think, is so interesting,
Mhm.
and learning that in itself makes me want to read it more.
And that helps as a science fiction writer, right? Because the more different cultures you know about and how they do things, the more what you realize, like, okay, this thing that everyone in my town does isn't actually the way every human is or every sentient being. Like it's just in my town. Like other countries do things differently. So an alien might do it even more differently. And it
Yeah,
makes you sort of like try to think about, how, what kind of the different, diversity can I put in my, not that I'm doing the best job. Other people do a better job of that than I do. Sometimes I get lazy. I just
uh,
realized today I don't really have much in the way of like religion for a lot of my aliens. They're just sort of like if they pray, it's sort of off screen. I'm like, I need to dig into that a little more. Because if there's aliens, a lot of them are going to worship, and they probably won't do it the way we do. So I gotta stick some of that in a future book.
indie authors I've found are so self-critical, and
I should put that in later.
and go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, like, I keep thinking of things that I have to like stick in, like, oh, maybe in book 5 I can add this thing that I.
Right, right. I can imagine that, like, say you're going to Walmart or you're just taking a hike, like you was talking about earlier. You find these certain things. It's like maybe that would be really cool in a book. I
All
can
the time.
imagine that happens quite frequently.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Shadow of Hyperion's coming out. When's it release?
September 12th. Oh, you got the little scroll. It's great. Yeah, September
Mhm.
12th. Assuming everything goes well, which it should. Arcs went out today. If there are reviewers listening who have not yet asked me who need an arc, but I'll say it really only makes sense to read it if you've read the first 3, because they're in order. So I'm always happy to give review copies of Wistful Ascending to people, and if they like it, I'm happy to give them a review copy of the Return of the Griffin.
Mhm.
To book, influencers, reviewers, people with shit, whatever, anyone, really just people who ask. So it went out to a bunch of people today. So right now I'm very stressed because I'm waiting for people to have read it and I'm waiting for their reactions. And like I think it's good, right? Because I wrote it and
Right.
I tried to write a good book, but sometimes you write things and it doesn't always like hit with your audience the way. I mean, there's not an author out there who's had every book's better received than the last one. Everyone has ups and downs over their career.
Sure.
I don't know
And
what's gonna
you see this a lot with, obviously like Robert Jordan or somebody with a really long series. People get readers get very critical and maybe kind of lose the perception of the author in that um, in what your goals are with the series. Which kind of brings me to my next question. Rohan, how should I pronounce
happen.
that? I like Rohan. That's kind of what I go to in my head as I'm reading. But who gave you the inspiration for his character? Because he is a dynamic. You feel empathetic towards him, and you're just drawn to him from the beginning.
Yeah. A lot of places, and a lot of it wasn't really conscious, but like, and then someone will say like, oh, remember this comic you read once? I'm like, oh, that's exactly like Rohan, right? So the fundamental structure of like this guy who's like a very competent like fighter, like violent, like person very good at violence, who has sort of like left the military and they're trying to live a quiet life. That's in a lot of places. I didn't invent that, right? Like
Mm.
Rurouni Kenshin, which is another manga that's very popular, very similar plot. The guy was like, a terrifying soldier, with swordsman, and he's just trying to be quiet, refusing to kill anymore. Um, but there's a lot of places we've seen with like the retired soldier, even like what is it, like Rambo is
Mm.
that story, right? Like I don't know if you've seen the
Yeah,
Rambo movies, right? With
absolutely.
Sylvester Stallone, right? Like that's kind of his story, right? He's not trying to get involved in combat. He's trying to live, but he gets pulled into stuff because otherwise there's no movie. Not First Blood. First Blood was a little different storyline, but the sequels, Rambo and Rambo 3, that's so the storyline. And then I made him Indian because I'm a huge fan of Bollywood movies, and I just wanted to give
Yeah,
like a nod and a wink to a lot of these action, Bollywood movies that I've watched, so specifically movies from like the Telugu region. Movies from different part of India is really big, like
yeah,
So in this country, we don't necessarily know all the different movies. Like there's several different places where movies are made, like a number of them, and the movies aren't the same. They have like a different flavor. And so movies from a certain region of India, they always have these like very overpowered main characters, and it's like, how cool are they going to look when they like beat up the bad? It's not like they're going to lose, but you're just like, how cool are they going to look in this
right.
fight? It's like, and they're super competent, and I wanted to give a little nod to that. So that's where his origin came from, and the sense of humor is just how I write characters. I don't have a
I,
choice.
the way that I took it as I read it, it was the play on humor was more directed at you as an author, maybe your sense of like your personality or how you kind of like it to interpret things, and that's how I took it. So I just assume that in real life you're a guy that likes to crack jokes and you had really good one-liners. They had me cracking up. They were really good, like cliche or not cliches, but
Like,
similarities between
yeah,
what we talk about on a day-to-day basis and kind of mixed in your own way.
I mean, everything Rohan says pretty much is something I would. Well, not when he's being intimidating, but when he's being funny, that's me. Um, but like it's me, but with the advantage of in real life, you don't think of all the quips right away in the middle of a conversation, right? But
Right.
when you write a book, I can set up a scene, and then I can put the book, I can put my computer away and think about it for a day and come back with a one liner, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it comes back right away with it. But I'm like, I can't always do that in a real conversation.
Yeah,
But
it's like, how do I have time to premeditate? And as an author, you do because you kind of set the scene up. It's like, what would make this sound great? In my head, that's kind of how it would go.
I can take weeks if I want to write one line, and no one knows when the book comes out. You're just reading. You read the next line. It's like right away.
It
You
comes
don't know how long
across the
it's going to take
same.
you. Yeah,
I
but
love that.
all the observational stuff is stuff that I would pretty much stuff that I would say, and wordplay, and I don't plan any of that. It just comes out when I write it.
I think that makes it funny because when you draw comparisons to things in a funny way, I mean, how can you get funnier than that? In real life, we often don't do that automatically. So when we hear somebody's perspective based on, you've got this situation, how can we make that funny? And it really works. And that's really what I enjoyed a lot about it. It hooked me right away. And so the Hybrid Helix is the series you're writing. How
Yep,
many installments do you really plan on having in it? Do you have a set number, or do you kind of
I
an
love this
idea?
question. So I don't know. It's a lot. I generally know. Would this be more sci-fi, fantasy, or a mix? It's definitely a mix. Go Reads Books is asking. It's definitely a mix. So I define these terms in very specific ways in my mind. So to me, sci-fi is you have all this miraculous stuff happens because of advanced technology. In fantasy, all this miraculous stuff happens because of magic.
Mm,
And in a mix, you can have miraculous things happening for both reasons, and that's exactly what I have. Right. So Rohan's powers are fundamentally magical. I don't think I use that word, but they are. He doesn't have like cybernetic implants. He has
yeah,
magical powers because of how he was born, and it's not biological. It's not like his skin is really thick, or it's not. It's not physical. It's metaphysical. That's not the right use of that word. I know. I'm a philosopher, but it's close
mm,
enough. He's dead. It's magical powers, and there's advanced technology. There's like, sentient space station has an artificial, brain. That's it's a very advanced computer. It's an artificial intelligence. It's fundamentally a computer, right?
Yeah.
So it's both. It's both to advance. It's like Marvel Comics, right? The Marvel universe has that, right? You have Iron Man with his fancy, powered armor, right next to Thor, who's a god, who's got magic, right? Who's Doctor Strange. Literally, he's a magician, right? So, and these guys are standing right next to each other in a fight, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing exactly that. So, it's science. I call it science fantasy.
The amount of races that you brought into this, it was, I loved it because almost every different person that you meet, or as you meet through Rohan, I would like to say, you find these people with different colored skin and horns, and I found myself, it sounds like maybe overwhelming if you hear me saying this, but the way that you write it, every time that person speaks, you can vision them. And it was really fun in an imaginative way. It really broadened my horizons as far as that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Matt. You were asking me about how many books.
Yep.
So I have a big story in mind. I don't have it plotted down to the book. Like, I generally know where I want things to go over time. I know I want things to end. I have an end planned. So I tell people 25 books, but I don't really have a 25 book plan. It might be 22, it might be 17. It might even be like 15 where I'm like, oh, I can wrap this up here. I don't know, but I'll end it. Like, there's an end point, and I'll get there and I'll say, this is the last book where, the story's ending. And I'm promising that to my readers, right? I'm not going to George R. R. Martin and spend 12.
Yeah. No, that's important.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to finish the series. There will be an ending, and, you may not, people might or might not. I can't promise everyone will like it, but I can promise that if I survive, I will finish the series, and it's gonna. And I'm aiming for a big. I think about. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dresden Files by Jim
Yeah,
Butcher.
absolutely.
That's, to me, in terms of like the structure of the series, each book is a standalone, has a beginning, middle, and end. It really wraps up its story, but things change from book to book also. Right? Like, he gains new powers and new alliances and meets new people, and the characters shift and the relationships shift. That's what I'm doing. So things change from book to book, but each book is a self-contained story. So you don't read, people don't read Wistful Sending and get to the end, they're like, it's a cliffhanger. Like, that shouldn't happen, right? The story
yeah. And I think that people respect that answer that you just gave a lot better than, I'm just not really sure, or this or that, because and we all know of those authors who have done that, and they get a lot of controversy, whether that's good or bad. I don't know. I'm not going to really comment on it. A lot of the series that I'm speaking of, I haven't read yet, so I don't have that passion behind my opinion. But now that I've started yours and want to continue reading your series, that is a respectful answer. I really enjoyed that. That's a great answer. I guess one of my favorite questions is, I've read some of your stuff now. I know kind of how you write your prose, and you've got humor in it. Who are, I guess, maybe 3 authors or books who maybe influenced you to start writing, or had an influence in how you write?
I'm going to say Jim Butcher. I really like the Dresden Files. I don't like it. I like everything of his that I've read. I don't love everything of his that I've read, but I like it all. But I really like the Dresden Files. like I said, the structure. I like a series where you get into a character and you can, like, book after book, really live in that world. Who else? I really was influenced to write, by R.A. Salvatore. So
Okay.
Okay, so he wrote I think he's got his start writing like D&D books, like Forgotten Realms books.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, for like the Drizzt to Erden is a Forgotten Realms character, like this dark elf who's a good guy, and I read a lot of. I think that's how Salvatore got famous. I'm not actually sure that's the first things he wrote, but that's what he was known for early in his career. He's done his own stuff too. I really like those. Those really motivated me to write. I don't really know why, but I started writing my own stuff when I was reading Salvatore, and I thought, this is cool. I can do something like this. And then another guy is probably Stephen Brust. Stephen Brust writes this series called the Jereg. It's Jhereg, and it's about this like guy who's like an assassin in a fantasy world.
I'm writing
And
this down as you go because I respect anything you're suggesting, man. I'm glad that I don't know a couple of
well,
what you're talking about, so I'm excited to research that afterwards.
I would try some Jared books. Those are good. Salvatore's there are books that resonate with you at a certain time in your life, and then maybe you look back on them later and you don't always think they're a diving moment. Great. Okay. Great book. I don't know. Did I read? I read Homeland. Yes. 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 The Drizzt books are good, but there's also like 50 of them, and I don't know that you need to read them all to get the gist of the character and like what he's trying to do with that story. I think
Yeah.
it's probably worth reading one or the first three maybe, and then decide for yourself. He's a little bit of a he pumps them out. The book.
There's a couple people that I've been kind of anxious. Sorry about the crying in the background, guys.
Totally. Hey, I'm a dad. I do never
Okay,
apologize
awesome.
to me. Never apologize to me for a kid doing kid stuff where their kids are supposed to be. Never.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old boy, and I've got my first daughter on the way. She'll be here in October.
I always hate it when I'm in like a supermarket and the kid's crying and the mom looks at me and says she's sorry, and I'm like, do not apologize to me because your kid is being a kid in a
This is the
supermarket.
best answer you can give a parent in that moment, by the way.
Come on, like that's I've been that. My kids are older because I'm older, right? Like my kid's crying in the background, something's really wrong because my son's 15.
Yeah, it's like let's stop real quick. Something's going on.
But something has to be really wrong if he's crying in the background, right? But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. So I've heard of the Drizzt, DRIZT, right, or ZZT.
I think it's DRIZZT, and his last name is like DO'URDEN.
I just want to make sure we were thinking of the same book. Yeah, so that's a series, and then you've got oh my goodness, The Color of Magic is the beginning of it. The Discworld.
I have not read Terry Pratchett, and I really should.
Yeah, Terry Pratchett. So I just ordered The Color of Magic. So just kind of speaking on those of which have written many books that are also standalones, which is freaking impressive if you ask me, because there's going to be Easter eggs, of course, but to keep each book in that series like a standalone, that has to be a feat. That has to be well planned.
It's hard. Well, yeah. I know what I'm doing is hard for me. That's all I can say. I find because every book, it's got to advance the overall storyline. Right? It's got to tell you more things about the overall world that you want the audience to know. It's got to move the whole storyline forward, and it still has to has its own arc that gets resolved in the book. And it's very tricky. I say it's hard. I don't know that I pull it off. I mean, I guess people have to read like a lot of them and go, yes, you pulled it off. Other people have to decide. But it's a lot. It's just a lot to think about. And I did write a standalone book, like not in a series, in the fall. That's going to come out sometime this fall. As soon as I get the cover together, it's a straight up fantasy novel, and it's a one and done. Right?
Okay.
It could be a sequel, but that doesn't need to be. Like it's a story, and it was just so much easier. It was like,
I got kind of complacent with one of the questions I was going to ask you later, but that's awesome, man. So it basically you saw yourself writing more than just a soap opera or a sci-fi. You love fantasy also.
I do love fantasy. The first books I ever wrote were fantasy.
That's cool.
They're in a trunk somewhere. They'll never see the light of day. But in the late 90s, I thought I was going to be a professional writer. And I wrote two and a half novels. They were straight up fantasy. They were in the world where I DM'd, like D&D, basically.
That's awesome.
My own magic system, but yeah. So those books I still have them on a disc somewhere, I'm sure. So I love fantasy. I probably read at least as much fantasy as science fiction in my life, I think. So yeah, and I wrote a fantasy novel in the fall. Really on the spur of the moment, I got an idea, and from the time I got the idea to the time I started writing, it was like just a couple weeks, and it's being edited by you can see that for this. Thank you. Yeah, you don't know the sweat I go through when you're not there, Bo. But So that fantasy novel should come out in the next couple of months. I don't have a time yet. I don't have a cover yet, and my editor is still working on it. And when I get it back from my editor, I don't really know what she's going to tell me. If she's going to say just clean up a few things, or she's going to say you have to do major work.
It's got
I
to be
don't know.
stressful.
Yeah, it is. But at least the thing about that is like no one's expecting it because it's not part of a series. So I like whenever I get it done, it'll be done, and I'm not in a hurry.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's kind of something you may in this long series that you plan on writing, maybe a little bit of escape from the stress of that.
You're exactly right. Right. I felt like because it was less pressure. Right. You're not meeting up the expectations of the previous book because there is no previous book, and you're not trying to set up the next book because there's no next book. So you just do it, and it was refreshing. It was like a bit of a mental break. And I came back from writing that book, and when I wrote Shadow of Hyperion, it was actually like I felt refreshed.
Sure. Yeah, I can
Nice.
see that for sure.
So I might do more of those. I don't really know. I have a plan for another fantasy series that's a little more light than that I might get to. I don't know. It's one nice thing, right? Being self-pub.
Yeah,
Whatever I
absolutely.
want.
I was telling my wife that this morning, like traditionally published or being self-pub, the cons and pros of both.
Yeah.
And to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, as
Uh-oh.
a self-pub author, you've kind of got the creative advantage in my book. You've got your idea of what you want to write. You're not necessarily on any deadline, but your own. You kind of choose when and where you publish it and when you want to talk about it, if you're ready, if you're not ready. So that's kind of how I explained it to my wife. Am I right or wrong?
You're 100% right. So, but there's a lot of pluses, some small downsides, right? Like because you can write whatever you want. Like just for example, like take the hybrid helix, right? If I had gone tradition, if let's say I tried, I wasn't going to get an offer, but let's say I had. If let's say Wistful Setting came out and it didn't sell great, like Return of the Griffin would never have made it to stores. Yeah, there you go, right? Like I can write this series and I can say, you know what, I'm going to write 22 books or 25 books. No one can stop me. But if I was a traditionally published, I'd have to count on them renewing my contract and agreeing to publish the series, which they often don't. Lots of series, they write one or two books and then they get canceled because the sales weren't
really?
good. Oh, all the time. Like a author, that's one of the reasons you don't get a lot of 25 book series. You do in certain genre. There's no promise, right? If you don't sell, they stop printing them, right?
It's
But
gotta
I
be
can,
stressful. It's gotta be stressful.
as long as I'm willing to pay for my own cover artist and put it on Amazon, like no one can stop me from releasing 25 books. Like it's up
That's
to just
incredible.
me, right? It's up to just me. So like, and like no one can say, we don't like the direction this is going in. It's too violent or not violent enough, or there's too much sex or too little sex. No one can tell me that, right? Like if someone says they want, take out some of the jokes, there's too many, like no one can make me do anything. You get a publishing deal from like Tor and they say, we want the violence to be grittier or less, whatever they tell you, you've got to kind of do it. So,
Is it really yours after that though? Like that's kind of what I was telling my wife earlier too. Like if you have a publisher and they're telling you, I want you to add this or subtract this, and maybe you didn't do this right, it must be hard as an author to really consider that yours if you didn't have that concept in your mind in the first place that now is being kind of made for you to put in or subtract.
I mean, I'm not going to tell a traditionally published author that the book's not theirs, but there is definitely that tension you're talking about, right? Like my editor can say, well, you should change this sentence. And I can say no, right? But
Right.
usually with my editors, if they say you should change the sentence, I'm usually like, oh, your way is better at expressing what I wanted to express, so I'll change it, right? Because
Okay.
if you find people who you work well with, they get what you're trying to do in your story, and their suggestions make them better. They get your voice better, right? But
Right.
yeah, if you have a regular publisher, you don't know, that doesn't necessarily happen.
Yeah, Timothy Wolf, who is also a self-pub author, I'm sure you know that. That was my biggest fear. I started writing book 2 months before book 1 was released, and I didn't want to risk over my head.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No.
Right.
So the downside, of course, is if you're with a major publishing house and you have a professional editor, they often know what they're doing, and more often than not, when they're making a suggestion about how to change your story, it's usually a good one, right? So, like, I mean, I can say, oh, it's nice that I don't have to listen to anybody, but to be honest, most of those people are trying to make your book better. They're not trying to take it away from you.
Trying to
And
sell copies, so
everything
of
I've heard,
course.
you know? But if you go with a professional publishing house, you have access to like all these people who, if you paid them out of your pocket, it would cost a lot of money, and they're reading your
Yeah,
book and trying to make it better, for free because
absolutely.
that's their job.
Marketing is it was one heck of a feat. My wife, just for example, she's a graphic designer. If she didn't pay people to market for her, boy,
Mm-hmm.
that'd be a 24-hour a day job.
Yeah.
So if you got that on your side, you can't go wrong with that.
If Tor offered me a contract, I mean, if any of the big publishing houses offered me a contract, I'd take it because just the marketing, just from being, every month, like all the big publishers just release a list of their releases, and all the big book bloggers and booktubers look at that list, right?
Mm,
Just that, not even if they're advertising, just the list they publish. That's a huge marketing thing. There's all
sure.
these booktubers who won't touch an indie book. I would reach
I don't get that.
this, but it's true, right? Like the big booktubers, they're not reviewing the biggest, right? Like Murphy Napier's not
Yeah,
reviewing a lot of indie stuff, right? And just by subscriber numbers, that's a big audience. I'm not saying Murphy would like
huge.
the book. I'm just saying if I was a Tor, Murphy would have known who I am, right? She'd have seen my
Solid point.
photo, and she might have read my book. Whereas right now, she does not know who I am, which is fine. I'm not criticizing Murphy Napier. I'm just using her as an example.
No, I get it for sure. There's a lot of those booktubers that I love to watch. In fact, who got me inspired to
Yeah.
do my own. I've just found my personal niche to be more with indie authors. I enjoy
Yeah.
it. I see the difference in the two, and I see the work and the passion that's put into self-publish. Not that people who are traditionally published don't have passion and desire to do so, but you know, I feel like anybody who's hearing what I'm saying right now understands my point. And it's just, I feel it's more deserving. I don't know, maybe I'll get criticized because of that, but
No,
I
but I
think
think it's
somebody who
hard.
puts everything on the
Yeah.
line deserves some people on their side.
I think you probably get just as much passion and stuff once you get once you get authors who are really big. Like Brandon Sanderson can do whatever the hell he wants,
Yeah, dude.
right? Because if his publisher doesn't like it, he's going, I can just go publish it myself, and he would, and he can run a Kickstarter, right? So he's
Yeah.
in a very privileged position that's not normal. But I think a lot of midlisters feel a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety, and if you know, interesting comparison. Go on Twitter and follow a bunch of like mid-list, traditionally published authors, and then go on Twitter and follow a bunch of indie authors, people like me who aren't making any money but we're indie, and compare the tone of our tweets. And the traditionally published mid-listers are angry a lot more often because they're pissed off that they're not getting the support they want. They're not getting the yes, yeah. Daniel Green and Mike's book reviews. Definitely did some self pub, but even Mike only does sort of the very biggest self pub.
Yeah, he does.
And I'm not criticizing Mike. Like, don't get me wrong. Like
Facts are facts,
you're allowed
though.
to
I
read whatever
understand.
you want. But don't worry. Tor is not offering me a contract. So like this is a hypothetical. you
No,
know.
I, it is. I understand that. It's crazy. I was also telling my wife earlier. I've read indie books that just blow my mind as far as
Mhm.
the style of writing and the poetic writing or the intellectualism of the way that they present their words, because it's an art. It is. There's a lot of authors you can read, and it's just like the last book you read, or you stumble upon that author that really is like, man, it's like I got to read this aloud to my wife or my kids or whatever, just so maybe I can see their expression to like to I feel this certain way. I wonder if anybody else feel that way, and I'm sure that that's true.
There are people who write amazing sentences, right? That's prose to me, right?
Hmm.
Great prose is when I can take a sentence out of your book and the sentence is beautiful, which is not something I claim for myself. I don't think I have great prose, but that which is not. I'm not upset about that. That's just not what I'm doing. But there's some phenomenal. The best indie writers are as good as the best traditional writers.
100%.
The worst indie writers are much worse than the worst traditional writers. Like the bottom of the barrel is very ugly. That's the
Yeah,
problem because
I think
literally
that's kind of be expected.
anyone can self-publish a book, and so anyone does. So the
Mm,
really bad ones are really atrocious, and that
mm,
unfortunately is part of the reason people look down on indie,
mm.
because they can pick an example of like a really crappy book, and like this would never come out of like Tor, and like you're right, it
You're
never.
right. That's why they're not. Yeah.
If you just pick out a random indie book off of Amazon randomly and read you're not going to have a good time. I've said this before, right? You might, right? But like chances are not, the odds are not in your favor. But the best ones, are phenomenal.
Yeah, they're just
They're
masterpieces, and it's
they're
like,
just
how
they're
are
just
you not?
they're just hitting a genre that like traditional doesn't know how to sell. Like what's the best lit RPG book that came out of like Tor? There aren't any.
Right.
Tor doesn't
Yeah,
know how to sell
absolutely.
lit RPG. Galance doesn't know how to sell lit RPG. They don't sell any. Does that mean none of them are good? No, it just means that those editorial houses have no idea how to handle those, so they don't sell any. So if you want a good lit RPG, you have to go indie. But they're
The
not
one
coming.
I'm looking at right now is Dungeon
Carl,
Crawler Carl.
Carl. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
I heard of
I've
it.
heard such good things about it. I hear that it's everything that this guy. I'm sorry, I don't know the author that wrote it, but I hear so much good stuff about that.
I don't know. Yes, I've heard phenomenal things. I'm not gonna. I don't think either I temperament for lit RPG myself, but I've read like Cradle, like the progression fantasy. I love that stuff. Um, and even then, right? Cradle's not coming out from Orbit or Tor or Galance. He still pubbed that, and he made a killing. That's that. You asked me who motivated me to write. That's one
Mm,
story, but Will White motivated me to self-publish in a lot of ways, because
that's
I have
awesome.
the arrogance to think, well, if he can make money doing it, so can I, which is totally like not true.
Well, I
But
feel like it just takes that little bit of luck with the skill that I know you have because I've read your work, along with it falling into the right hands and just there is a amount like Ryan Cahill. He's very successful indie author, and he definitely writes great. He's got a great story. I love reading his books. There has to be a variable of that right person getting a hold of that book and sending. You know what I mean?
look, yes, I will. I don't want to be a whiner, right? Like I have been, by my standards, I am very successful. I have had many readers who enjoy my work, who have reviewed it, who have communicated with me. I am very pleased with what has happened. Would I like to break even on my publishing career?
Mhm.
That would also be nice, like I would like that. Will that happen? I don't know. My plan is to keep pumping out books, and I'm hoping by the time book 12 comes out, people are going to be like, you have to read this series to more and more of their friends, and eventually like the sales get to the point where it's paying for itself. that's
I always
that's
tell my wife because she works really hard as a graphic designer. I think tenacity and ambition has no chance or no choice but to eventually pay off. I think that if you work as hard as you can and do the best that you can, it's impossible for you to fail. So,
I don't know. I hope.
um, right.
I
So
hope.
if you could
I,
tell your, oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, like, I'm committed. So whether it works or not, I'm going to write my series. And I figure the worst case scenario, I've spent a lot of money on this hobby, and I have this book series that does what I want it to do, and I have people who have read it and who have enjoyed it, and I will be happy. And I
And it's
will,
going to outlive you. I think
yeah,
that's
because
important.
the story I want to tell, and it's the way I want to tell it, and like I can look with, like, I can look on my Amazon webpage, and I can have pride, like this is like the story I wanted to say. And the worst case scenario is, and I end up like not having, but like people have hobbies they spend money on, right?
Right.
Like I could have bought a boat, right? And like there's nothing
Absolutely.
wrong with a boat, right? Like you spend a lot of money on the boat, you're not gonna make it back, right? You just have a boat, and
I
then
think
you
that's
get
a
a new
great
boat,
point.
right? So I'm like, I could have a drug habit and I could snort all this money, but instead
Right.
I'm spending money on the art cover you see as the background. That's my cocaine habit right there.
I'd say that as a hobby or whatever you consider your work to be, it's a very lucrative investment because you're giving people stories, and I don't know if there's any better version of somebody's personality or self.
And it's communication. It's you're creating a bond.
Mm,
And if someone like I always think of this one guy. HC Newton. How I forgot his last name. I feel like a schmuck. I'm sorry. He does a blog, The Irresponsible Reader, and
Mhm.
like he's like he lives in like Idaho, and he's I think he's around my age. He lives in Idaho. He blogs about he blogs
Oh
about
yeah, Brian Lee Durfee.
no different guy.
Oh, okay, my bad.
HC, it's HC, no different guy. But he doesn't write. He's just a reader. But he read Wistful Sending and he wrote this whole review where he just sort of got all the things I was trying to say in this book. And I'm like, I feel connected to this dude. There's no way in life I would ever have spoken one word to this guy
Right.
other than through this book. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm getting there
That's
in a very
incredible.
roundabout way, right? I have this connection, and we've communicated on Twitter, but like honestly, I feel like I could go to his house and I'd be like, knock on his door, like, "Hey, I'm Joe," and he'd invite me in for a beer or something, right?
That's
I'm not
awesome,
going to do
man.
that. HC, if you're watching, I'm not doing that. I'll tell you first. But
We'll
like,
show up tomorrow.
but we have this connection because the book and then the review, and like I never would have met him. Idaho. Like, what am I doing in
Absolutely.
Idaho? You know, and I live just outside New York City, right? Like I don't I don't travel that much, so I don't know. You know, and there are all these people. HC Newton. You know what it is? There's a female writer whose first name who goes by HC
Newell.
something else. Thank you, Bo.
Newell.
Newell.
HC Newell. Yeah,
And
yeah.
keep I can't it's like I have this brain fart, you know, or like I get the two names switched in my head, even though they're extremely different people. It's kind of funny. I'm
It's
sorry.
very easy to do, absolutely. Especially with like the HC part,
Right,
like just the
right.
abbreviation. A
Yeah,
lot of and a lot of writers do that. I actually really like that. It kind of sounds really professional.
I do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it took some research to find if I could just call you Joe or if I had to call you JCM. I was like, that's awesome. He's got a real name.
I had to think about it that when I first did like an interview, I'm like, and someone called me Joe, and I'm like, how did you know? And I'm like, oh, it's my Twitter handle, so it's not that
Yeah.
hard to figure
How
out.
do you know me?
I go by, will it confuse readers? And I just gave up. I'm like, I don't care. Just call me
No, I
Joe.
think when you read JCM Berne, it sounds very, very professional and it sounds good off the tongue,
That's
and
what I was going for.
it's memorable. So I think you made the right choice.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
wrestled over
absolutely.
that. That was hard. Choosing like what name, like the name to go there. I wrestled. I spent like a week, 2 weeks going back and forth, thinking about it. I had no idea how to do it. And I
It's like the
finally,
second thing people look at, right? You got the
yeah,
cover art, and then they're like, "Who wrote this?"
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's very influential.
yeah. It's important, but I didn't know how to make that decision. You know, I was like, I don't know. And then someone was like, well, if you use your initials, then they won't know if you're male or female, so they won't have any preconceptions. And I'm like, oh, that sounds good. All right, I'll go with that. And then I'm like, okay, it's not working because everyone's, people see me on YouTube. And like, clearly, I'm presenting as male. You know, I'm sorry.
No,
No one's gonna be confused, but it all worked out. It all worked out.
absolutely. If there was one, I was excited to ask this question. I kind of came up with it last minute, but
For
if there was one sci-fi or space opera that you've read that I have to read before I die, what is it? I know, right? Don't you hate those
it.
questions? It's like
I
pick
do.
one of the 900 favorite books that you've got.
It's the first one that comes to mind is something like Dune, and but I don't know that. I mean, there's different ways of looking at the question, right? Is it what's the best book? Is one way of looking at it. Like, what's the
Hmm.
best like sci-fi? I don't know the answer to that. But then you can look at it like, what's the one that's sort of most important historically? That was the most influential, and and then there's like, okay, well, what's some of the stuff that was really influential? You probably don't want to read. Like, I've read like War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and it was huge. Like, it basically invented science fiction as we know it. It was hugely
Really?
well. Like, he had like aliens and like ray guns and stuff, and that stuff had never appeared before. Like that whole, it was like amazingly innovative, but
That's
like
impressive.
it really no. I mean, this was like early 1900s, late 1800s, like a
Are you
long time
serious?
ago. Yeah. H.G. Wells.
Wow.
I think I'm gonna have to look it up now. I'm gonna feel really bad if I'm not off by much. But like, I don't know if it's good by modern standards. Like he was the first guy to do these things, but you know, other people have done it better since
Sure.
then. You know,
Maybe
like
appreciated.
yeah, so like from an historical perspective, you know, you could read that, but I mean, I wouldn't because it's like it's kind of, sort of you read it and you're like, okay, this is kind of
Mhm.
repetitive and whatever, but like I can appreciate that it's so original because it was the only one that was original, you know. Um, so I'm probably gonna have to go with Dune, and I'm gonna think of another one like in the car later. Have
Hey,
like
I want you to I want you to message me and let me know what it is because Dune, a lot like Ender's Game, is has been on my list to like the maybe sci-fis, but Dune is high up there, so I'm definitely gonna be buying that now.
So I'm gonna say the same thing about both of those books. So there's a lot of Dune books, and I would not say you need to read them all.
Mhm.
I would say Dune is really good. I really like the first four, but a lot of people don't. Like I'm in the minority, right? I like from Dune, Children and Dune Messiah. I think I forget the order, and then God Emperor of Dune I really love, but God Emperor of Dune is a really weird book. I wouldn't tell anyone they have to read it. Dune I really liked. Same thing with Ender's Game. Ender's Game is I thought it was a really nice book, a really good book, but I didn't feel the need to read all the others in the series because he wrote a bunch more, and you can stop at Ender's Game. Like you know, if you
Gotcha.
want to read it, read more. I mean, whatever you want. I'm just saying, like, don't feel you need to read them all, and
There's
especially with
certain ones that I feel like I have to read now that I'm like in this thing, if that makes sense. Like now that I
really does.
know that I'm passionate about it, I want to read the best of the best, and
Like, but
yeah,
if
the
I were
Dune.
you, like as a book, you know, booktuber with a channel and everything, like I imagine it's hard to resist like Wheel of Time just because it's talked
Yeah.
about so much. I don't love Wheel of Time. Like I like Wheel of Time, but I don't love
Mhm.
it. I'm a much bigger I'm a Malazan diehard. Like
I'm about to
the
start the Gardens of the Moon myself. It's been much procrastination because I know that I can't like be reading anything else, but I'm very excited.
I love those books. They just do so many things. There's so much stuff going on in there, and it's really nicely done. I love those books. Um, I mean, if you could, if I was stuck on a desert island for the rest of my life and I had one series to reread over and over, it would be Malazan. Plus,
Oh
it's so
man,
complicated. You could probably read it 10 times and get more out of it each time.
have
Like,
you read Hyperion by Dan Simmons?
um, I liked it. Again, I felt the sequels were not necessary. Like it didn't
Mhm.
add enough to the story. I would read. I wouldn't tell anyone not to read. I would say read Hyperion is fine. I don't know if I'd put it above Dune. Um,
Okay.
but man, there's so much. I don't really, I don't really think about these things in this way too much. I'm going to think of something later. I can think of a lot of comic book series um, that I've read, like science fiction comic. Like in a way, like Wistful Sending is more inspired by like the cosmic comic book stuff than it is by science fiction novels. It's a guy
Okay.
punching ships, right? So like that's more of a like Jim Starlin's world. Like, Jim Starlin's a guy who basically like came up with like the Infinity. I don't know if you're a Marvel movie guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so he came up with like Thanos. That was Jim Starlin. Like the Infinity Gauntlet, the Infinity Stones. That was all him in the early '70s. Like this was stuff. Even I read it as reprints, like not when it came out because I was
Mhm.
born in '71. But that stuff was hugely influential on me. The Thanos storylines. I just watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3 last night. I enjoyed that.
Oh man, I can't wait to watch that. I've been seeing like the commercials and stuff,
Yeah,
and
it's streaming.
that was my comparison. Is just only based on one thing only though was the races. Like you watch Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's so many different races, and it's like, how did you pull that off? Well,
Yeah.
you do it very well in the book, and it's just as visual.
Yeah.
So, where can viewers get the all of your books? And you said September 12th, right?
September 12th. Yeah, actually, the ebook is already up for pre-order if anyone wants to pre-order it. But I totally understand if you want to wait for the reviews to come out. That makes perfect sense. Everything's on Amazon exclusive.
Okay.
So when you are ready to publish your book, you need to have discussions with people about the right way to do that. And I'm not saying Amazon exclusive is the best way, but there are pluses and minuses to that versus going wide where your book's available in other places, but there are disadvantages. It's a long story. You
So I
you
can
need to have that
imagine.
conversation, but we
I
don't
can
need to do it.
imagine. Yeah, sure. I can imagine as an indie author, the positives and the pros for having all of your work in one place, highly advantageous compared to I'm here and there and there and there and there.
There are downsides right now. Amazon's in control, so Amazon can decide to like cancel your books, and you're just screwed. You've lost your
Yeah,
audience, right? And there are other downsides like the hardcover is it's naked, right? Like the cover is printed on the there's no shoot, what do you call it, like the slip cover, you
yeah,
know,
dust cover.
yeah, the dust jacket, right, the dust jacket. There's no dust jacket, right? That's just, this is how they print it. That's what they do. So if you're Amazon exclusive, that's what you get. On the other hand, your book is on can be on Kindle Unlimited, which has been a huge revenue source. So it's a long story. Anyway, all my stuff's on Amazon. If you want to find me, you can go to jcmberne.com. I'll make it easy, right? And
Awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of what I was looking for right there.
yeah,
That one area where they can find all that
yeah,
stuff. So
that's my website, and I have a web guy, and Shadow of Hyperion's not up there yet, but it will be, I'm sure. At some point, I'll tell my web guy, "Oh yeah, I got a new book coming out. We got to put it on the website." Um,
awesome.
I don't put, and I have a YouTube channel at JCM Berne, so I try to be consistent.
I'm just now learning that, like, I've got you on YouTube, but I haven't investigated. Yeah, I've done like your Twitter a lot and Instagram, but so you do book reviews also? No.
No,
Okay, I misheard
no,
you. I'm so sorry.
no, no, no. That's fine. It's probably my channel is probably AuthorTube and not BookTube. I think I get on there and I have some topic in about books that I will just go on about. And I used to blog, and I realized no one was reading my blog. So if I made a video about it, I would get more people to read watch the video. So it's all
Sure.
topics, things like what's the difference between science fiction and fantasy? What's the difference between hard and soft science fiction? What's the difference between a hard and soft magic system?
Those
Um,
are great topics.
Thank you. I made a video about each of those. Why indie is better than or can be better than trade. I had a video of that. So I just get on and I give like almost like a lecture, and it's usually it's more for me to just get it off my chest. Like I'll have some topic, it'll be like bugging me that someone will like, what's the difference anyway? And I'm like, I'll tell you what the difference is. And it's like the only way to get it off my chest and stop like thinking about it is to like make a video or write an article, and the videos just
So
got more attention.
I'm highly interested in that, and I'm not just saying that. So as somebody who is coming into this full force, who there's never going to be a time in the rest of my life, and I'm 100% sure of this, where I'm not passionate about similar things that you are, and those are topics in which I don't think that there's ever an ending point in which you can learn based on perspective and all that. So that's awesome to know.
Well, you'll if you watch my videos, you'll get my perspective, and you can disagree with me. That's fine, right? I'm a former philosopher, right? By trade, I studied it at the graduate level. So like this whole like defining terms and really examining what things really mean is like that's my that's my wheelhouse, you know.
I
So
love that.
I think it's good stuff. I mean, obviously, I think it's good stuff. I don't know. Maybe people won't. Some people like it. That's fine. You know, I'm not. Look, I mean, the YouTube channel is like it's like that's a hobby, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think of myself as a writer, and if I have YouTube videos, and if some of them like get some views, that's great. But that's not the goal. The goal is the books. You know,
Absolutely. And it's great to
I,
have those little outlets too. You know, if you've got a creative outlet that maybe helps you advance on the other creative outlet you have, or maybe
I,
help somebody on their journey to that.
and they do get me readers. Usman, who did from Bards and Books, he watched my video on why I made my main character South, because my main character is South Asian and I'm not. Like I'm white. Like I know I
Mhm.
look white, but I also am white. And I did a whole video on like why I did that and like what were the concerns one way or the other and why I felt it was okay. And he watched. He was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting." So he read the books, and I'm like, "Okay,
He's a
so
really intelligent dude. Like I like watching his stuff.
he's great.
He's a good guy to have on your side. So
Yeah,
I
he's
tell him all the
fantastic.
time.
He's
So
fantastic." Yeah.
I've kind of went through most of all of the questions I had for you. Is there anything left? Maybe you want to get out into the world before we kind of wrap things up.
Jew, again, there's a lot of stuff.
All right.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be on here, man. It was great.
Oh man, I was so happy when you told me you'd do it because I'm really excited for you. September 12th, guys. Make sure to
Thank
pick
you.
up that pre-order. He said Amazon, joebyrne.com, right?
JCM Berne.
JCMBerne.com. That's his official website. And I couldn't be happier with how the interview went. And I'm really excited and honored that you came on. And I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you, man. Absolutely. You know where to find me.
Yes, sir. Well, best of luck on your publication release.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a great night. And thanks again, man.
You too. You too. My pleasure. Thank you
And
for
thanks
having
for
me.
the viewers, guys. Thanks for watching Beard of Darkness book reviews. And we'll see you next time.
Oh, wow.